let this be said. If you're going to do it, go all the way. And if you're going to blow all the way down to the very core. And that's what the Cincinnati Bengals were able to do in the 2019 season. It's got to feel good if you're a Bengals fan. The Bengals, at least for a little bit, are back. But they went all the way with it. And if you're going to tank, there's no better way to do it. And if you look back at this 2019 season for Bengals fans, let's be honest. The single biggest thing that mattered to so many of you was that the Marvin Lewis era finally ended after 16 seasons. You probably felt like Mike Brown was never going to quit on him, but he finally was shown the door, so to speak. All that time devoted to one head coach, a few playoff appearances here and there, sure, but 0 playoff wins. It was certainly time for a change. And I think if you're a Bengals fan, you went into this season seeing the hiring of Zach Taylor to be the new head coach, wondering, is he just getting hired because he once associated with Sean McVay, and is that it? Or is he the right type of guy to lead this organization going forward? You were just happy and content with the fact that Marvin Lewis was gone. You knew this team wasn't any good, and that you were potential contenders for the number 1 overall pick. Like, you had to know that. Now, sure, maybe you've assumed that the Dolphins were going to end up with the number 1 overall pick, especially because they were so overtly tanking by comparison. But there was no question in my mind. You looked at the Bengals. You had no reason for optimism, no reason for hope. They were beyond question one of the worst teams on paper in the league, and they certainly lived up to that throughout the course of 2019. They got off to an 0-11 start. They were winless in September, October, and November. Again, if you're going to do it, then do it and go all the way bad. Sure, it didn't help having A.J. Green miss the entire season due to injury. That sucks. Former 2017 first-round pick John Ross. Imagine that. John Ross III injured again and played a whopping 8 games. That said, you did have Joe Mixon rush for over 1,000 yards. You had Tyler Boyd have over 1,000 yards receiving. You got a brief glimpse at the rookie 4th-rounder Ryan Finley and saw that in no way, shape, or form could he ever be considered to be the guy. So for the most part, you had to ride out the string with Andy Dalton one more time for one last ride in 2019. And how crazy is it? You finally get a fully healthy season out of Tyler Eifert. He plays all 16 games. And in the process, you lose A.J. Green for all 16 of them. Your offense finished 25th in total yards, yet your defense decided they were going to be even worse, being 29th in the league in yards allowed. And when you look at the differentials and talk about point differentials, this team was 30th in points scored. So they were bad, they were brutal, they were boring, and they were 30th in point differential, meaning they didn't score much and they gave up a lot more. But you had to expect that. And I would say, at least if anything else, for Bengals fans, you didn't finish 0-16. And you didn't deserve to be 0-16. The 2008 Detroit Lions deserved to be 0-16. The 2017 Cleveland Browns deserved to be 0-16. The Bengals weren't bad enough for long enough to justify going 0-16. And at least you won a couple of games. And it's got to feel good that you closed out the season with the victory over Baker, the Bust, and the Cleveland Browns. Hey, you'll take something, I guess. And I suppose a good thing here, if there ever is a good thing about Mike Brown being the owner of your team, is that he wasn't going to make some type of knee-jerk, reflex, reactionary move by firing Zach Taylor after 1 year, which would have been totally and incredibly unfair to him. This was a bad situation going into it. You were bringing him in as the descent was still happening. It wasn't like you had cratered out. The cratering was still to come, and most everybody could logically look at this team and see the cratering was coming in 2019. So at least Zach Taylor is going to get more time, and he deserves that time. Now, looking ahead to what the future may hold for the Cincinnati Bengals, first looking at what they got out of the 2019 draft class, wasn't a lot. Doesn't help that first-round pick offensive tackle Jonah Williams from Alabama missed the year due to injury. You would hope bringing him into the fold in 2020 will help your offensive line a little bit. Second-round pick, the tight end from Washington, Drew Sample, had 5 catches in 9 games, so he missed almost half the season, and when he did play, he didn't make any impact whatsoever. So when you talk about a Bengals team that already was at a talent deficit, your first 2 picks didn't contribute really at all. That's not a formula for success in the short term. You look at Ryan Finley. He got a brief starting look, showed that he was bad, makes you wonder whether he's even backup worthy at the NFL level. By far, the biggest contribution they got out of the draft class was Jermaine Pratt, the linebacker. He started 9 games at linebacker. He looks like he's a future starter for the team. So it wasn't all bad. You sure as heck would like to get more out of Drew Sample since you spent a second-round pick on him as a tight end. But if you get Jonah Williams to come back in 2020 and be healthy and be somewhere on that offensive line, whether it's outside at right tackle or left tackle or on the interior, no matter where it is, you would expect he'll provide some type of upgrade. So they should be able to get more out of this year's draft class in 2020, but time will tell. In terms of kind of the overall offseason perspective, this is a team that's got just a little bit under $60 million in cap space as it stands right now, with the potential to add quite a bit more. Talking about some guys that could potentially be cap casualties. I think the easiest lock, beyond question, is Andy Dalton. $17.7 million cap hit in 2020 with absolutely no dead cap associated. It's time for him to move on. It's time for the Bengals to move on. And there's no real negative consequences or repercussions for the Bengals to do so. So he'll be shown the door, unless something dramatically goes wrong here, which I can't imagine why, especially with where the draft could be going for the Bengals. Yeah, Andy Dalton's time after 9 years, Bengals fans, it's mercifully over for all of you. You could look at a couple of other potential cap casualties, though. Trey Kirkpatrick missed a good portion of the season. Do you want to pay him $8.3 million more, or do you want to save that by cutting him? Cordy Glenn missed a good portion of the season due to injury. If you cut him, you could save $7.5 million. I guess here's the thing. You're not exactly going to have free agents beating down the door to come play with you, especially in this beginning of this rebuilding project. But do you really want to spend $7.5 million more than you need to for Cordy Glenn? You can cut him. It's not really making any impact on your team because he already didn't play. Or maybe you do decide to keep him because you got the cap space and you know a ton of guys aren't going to come along and play for you in free agency anyways. Dre Kirkpatrick, you can save $8.3 million. Sure seems like the logical thing to do to show him the door. In terms of the team and their own free agents, obviously the marquee one's going to be A.J. Green. There's definitely a part of me that wants to see him go somewhere else where he can play with a real deal, big-time quarterback and ride out the string the last few years of his career, help kind of cement his place as a future Hall of Famer, and just get his opportunity to get the spotlight that he deserves, that frankly he's never really gotten the same love and respect that Julio Jones has, because Julio Jones got to play with Matt Ryan for all of his career, and A.J. Green had to play with Andy Dalton. But there's also that element to me of, if you're the Bengals, he's your dude. He's that dude in some ways. And he represents kind of a Larry Fitzgerald type of presence for your team, your locker room, your organization, your fan base. You have the cap space, even if it means you overpay for him a little bit, even if it means that you're paying him at the tail end of the deal and he's not nearly contributing at the level that his cap number indicates he should. I'd be really hard-pressed to think it's a good thing for the Cincinnati Bengals to let A.J. Green walk out the door without a big-time contract, to thank him for the 9 years he's been a part of the organization, because those are the types of things that potential free agents down the road, as this team would rebuild and want to get better and seek out players, even though you're talking about Mike Brown, how aggressive is he really going to be? Nonetheless, let's say something magically happens and they are. It's going to be how they treat a guy like A.J. Green that some players and some agents will look at and determine whether or not they want to be a part of that. Then you've got Darqueze Dennard. He took a while to get into the flow, but he's been better recently. As a result, I'd be surprised if he wasn't brought back. You got questions about Andrew Billings. He's a run stuffer. How much are you going to pay for that? But then how much is it really going to cost you? You probably bring him back. Trey Hopkins started at you for center. Probably makes sense to explore bringing him back into the fold. Tyler Eifert will be an interesting one because on the one hand, they just spent a second-round pick on Drew Sample, but got nothing out of him this past year. Tyler Eifert was healthy all season for the first time in a long time, but you still went 2-14 with him. So how much are you really going to invest in him, and how much risk do you really want to associate with giving him big money and then he'll go right back to being injured again? Will be interesting to see what the Bengals decide to do. In terms of the draft, the big thing is they blew for Burrow. They got the number 1 overall pick. But it's interesting with the Bengals. You're looking at a team that's rebuilding, but they don't have a ton of draft pick capital. They've got a draft pick in each of the 7 rounds, but no additional ones, nothing like that. Doesn't strike me as a team that's going to be incredibly aggressive. I'd be absolutely stunned if they're going to trade out of the number 1 overall pick. The way it looks right now, and granted a lot of things could change, it sure looks like Joe Burrow, the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback from LSU, is going to be the Bengals' choice at number 1 overall, which makes sense because that is the number 1 team need. You're in the bottom of the barrel of the NFL. You're back to being the Bengals. In order for that to change, you must get that franchise quarterback to build around. Part of the problem for the Bengals was that when Marvin Lewis was there and they moved on from the Carson Palmer era and they drafted Andy Dalton, they took him in the second round. He was never going to be that level of dude. He was a good quarterback, average quarterback, but you were never going to ascend past a certain point with Andy Dalton as your starting quarterback. If you feel Joe Burrow is that guy, then you absolutely must take him at number 1 because it's the biggest need and it will represent the change in trajectory of the organization overnight. In terms of other team needs, I think whether Cordy Glenn is retained or not, even if Jonah Williams comes back and plays offensive tackle next year, offensive tackle is still a need long term. Offensive guard is going to be a need in the short term and the long term, even when you talk about former first-round pick Billy Price in the fold. The bottom line is if you're going to be drafting a young quarterback like Joe Burrow, number 1 overall, you better do a better job of protecting him. You need to do a really good job of protecting him, I should say. And as a result, it makes sense to heavily invest in the offensive line. So you're looking at this draft class. Offensive tackle class is really good. You can potentially get a good one in round 2, round 3. You need to address that position at some point in time. On the defensive side of the ball, feels like we've been talking about it for years. They need some type of impact outside linebacker. This has been a bane in their existence, I feel like, for a long time. They need somebody that can be that type of guy. They also need some depth on the defensive line. I could argue both inside and on the edges. When you look at Carlos Dunlap, he's on the wrong side of 30. Geno Atkins is on the wrong side of 30. Jordan Willis has been a complete bust. You talk about Carl Lawson. He has flashes and moments, but he's not anything consistent, more role player than he is impact starter. Former 2018 second-round pick, Sam Hubbard, is nice. He's a good base end, I'll give you that, but you could use more depth to rotate in on the edges. You need to get better and stronger up front, period. The good thing for the Bengals is this. 2019 was a disaster. You were bad, but you knew you were going to be bad. And it's over. And at least you did it right. You ended up with the number 1 overall pick, and there appears, at least at this moment, to be a quarterback that is worth using that number 1 overall pick on. It could be really, really hard for the Bengals to bungle this, is what I'm trying to say. And Bengals fans, at least for now, you have a little reason for hope and optimism, even if it's not much. You have something to hang your hat on, something to potentially look forward to, because some better days could be on the horizon in the near future.